My family kicked me out of my house on my birthday. So when their wedding day came, I destroyed their wedding. Hi, everyone. I'm Lena, 27, and I just had a birthday gift so insulting that it flipped my entire world upside down. I always knew my family was difficult, but I had no idea just how low they could go. Up until this moment, I thought my life was manageable. Not great, not tragic, just a constant balancing act where I carried way more than my fair share. If someone had asked me last week, I'd have said, yeah, my family isn't perfect, but they love me. Yeah? I'm wondering if they ever truly cared at all. So let me rewind a bit. I'm the eldest of 3 siblings, my younger brother Kevin, 24, and my sister Alyssa, 19. We grew up in a house that's been in our family for generations. It belonged to my grandparents, then my parents, and eventually it was left to me. That was never supposed to be a problem, but the moment the will was read, my family started treating me like I had stolen something from them. It wasn't like I hadn't earned it. While my siblings were out partying, I was the one who took care of our sick grandparents in their final years. When Mom and Dad passed away, I was the one handling everything, the funeral, the debts, and the estate. But somehow in my family's eyes, I was just lucky to have the house. They acted like it was a lottery prize I had won instead of something I had poured my time, energy, and emotions into. Despite that, I still tried to be a good daughter and sister. I never charged them rent when they crashed at my place. I covered bills when my mom needed help before she passed. I loaned Kevin money when he was between jobs even though I knew I'd never see a dime of it again. And Alyssa? I paid for half of her college tuition. But even after all that, they never appreciated me. They only saw what they thought I owed them. My birthday rolled around and I wasn't expecting much. Maybe a nice dinner, a few laughs, a small gift, nothing extravagant, just acknowledgement. After everything I'd done for them, I thought I'd at least get a heartfelt moment. Instead, what I got made my stomach drop. We were gathered at my place. My aunt, uncle, cousins, my siblings, they were all there. Everything seemed normal at first, just a regular family get-together. Then Kevin handed me a wrapped box, a smug grin on his face. We all pitched in for this. It's something really thoughtful, he said. I smiled, not suspecting anything at first. I unwrapped it, expecting. I don't know, maybe a book, a sweater, a small but sweet gesture. Instead, inside the box was a printed notice. I stared at it, confused. Then I started reading. Notice of eviction. I blinked. You are required to vacate the premises within 30 days. Signed, your family. I swear my heart stopped beating for a second. At first, I thought it was some kind of sick joke. I looked up, expecting to see someone holding back laughter, waiting to yell, gotcha. But the room was silent. My aunt had this sympathetic smile, my uncle wouldn't meet my eyes, and Alyssa was grinning like she had just won a prize. Don't be upset, honey, my aunt finally said, her voice way too sweet. We thought you'd be happy to finally have a change of pace. You can move somewhere, nicer. My breath caught in my throat. Is this a joke? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Kevin shrugged, playing innocent. You're an adult now, Lena. It's time. We've all talked about it, and honestly, it's for your own good. You don't need all this space, right? You could sell it, get something more manageable. I felt my pulse in my ears. No one had talked to me about this. No one had given me a hint that they were planning this. And now they were sitting here, on my birthday, expecting me to just smile and go along with it. I forced my face into something neutral. If I lost it now, they'd paint me as the villain. Oh, wow. How thoughtful, I said, my voice too calm. I could feel my hands shaking. That's when Kevin laughed. My dad's side of the family nodded like this was normal, like I should be grateful. And then my mom's sister spoke up. You know, your grandparents always intended for this house to be a family home. Not just yours, sweetie? That's when I knew. This wasn't just a rude birthday joke. They had been planning this for months. As I sat there, holding that eviction notice, I had a clarity I'd never had before. They had never respected me. I was just a placeholder, someone who kept things running until they were ready to take over. They saw me as temporary. The moment I stopped serving their needs, I was disposable. And the worst part? They really thought I'd go along with it. They assumed I was so desperate for their approval that I'd roll over and hand them everything. I looked around the room, at the smug faces, at the fake sympathy, at the greedy eyes already picturing their new living arrangements. And that's when something in me snapped. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to argue. I was going to destroy them, quietly, methodically, and permanently. I took a deep breath, put on my best fake smile, and said, You're right. It's time for a change. Their faces lit up, thinking I was giving in. But in reality, I had just declared war. I folded the eviction notice carefully, like it was a delicate thing that might tear if I wasn't gentle enough. The room still buzzed with murmurs and self-satisfied glances, as if they had just gifted me a life-changing opportunity rather than a blatant betrayal. My brother sat back in his chair, arms crossed, his grin widening like he was waiting for me to break down. My sister took out her phone, probably already texting her friends about how I was finally getting kicked out. My aunt had that rehearsed look of concern, her hands clasped in fake sympathy. I felt nothing at first, just a strange, hollow silence ringing in my ears. Then, like a slow rising tide, an entirely different emotion took hold of me. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't shocking. It was something sharper, colder. I looked at each of them, letting my gaze linger just long enough to make them shift uncomfortably. My father cleared his throat like he was about to launch into some well-prepared speech about why this was good for me, why I should be grateful they were giving me a fresh start. I didn't give him the chance. "You're right," I said, letting my voice sound calm, agreeable, even appreciative. "It is time for a change." The satisfaction on their faces was instant. My uncle nodded like he had personally bestowed wisdom upon me. My aunt let out a relieved sigh. My father gave me an approving smile. Kevin smirked, his eyes flashing with victory. Alyssa muttered, "Finally." Under her breath, already looking at my furniture like she was mentally rearranging it for her future bedroom. I smiled wider, meeting Kevin's eyes directly. "So when are you all moving out?" The silence that followed was so complete that for a second, I thought I had imagined saying the words out loud. Then came the blinking, the shifting, the exchanged glances as confusion settled over them like an unwelcome guest at their self-congratulatory gathering. "What?" My father was the first to speak, his brows furrowing. I kept my tone light, as if we were just discussing weekend plans. "The house is mine, legally. It was left to me in the will, signed and recorded. If anyone's leaving, it's not me." Kevin's smirk disappeared. "We already talked to a lawyer," he snapped. "The family can file a claim. You can't just keep it all to yourself." I tilted my head, pretending to consider his words. "You're right, Kevin. You can file a claim. It'll take months, possibly years, to go through the courts, and even then, given the clear documentation in the will, it's unlikely you'd win. But sure, go ahead." I gestured toward my father and aunt. "You guys can pool together and get a lawyer. Should be fun." Alyssa scoffed. "You wouldn't do that to us. You always act like you're above drama." I turned to her and let my smile sharpen just enough to unsettle her. "This isn't drama. This is reality. You can't serve someone eviction papers in their own home and expect them to thank you for it." My father's expression darkened. "We're trying to help you, Lena. This house is too much for one person." "Then why do you all want it so badly?" Silence. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands on the table. "Let me be clear. I'm not leaving. You can file all the legal paperwork you want, but I hope you have deep pockets because you'll be paying a lawyer for a long time. And in the meantime, if you don't want to be here, if this house is such a burden, you're all welcome to leave." Kevin's face turned red, and for a second, I thought he might actually lunge across the table. My father's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists. Alyssa muttered something under her breath, but I ignored her. The moment stretched, thick and uncomfortable. I wanted them to feel it. I wanted them to understand, truly understand, that I was done being their doormat. Then, as if someone had pressed a reset button, my aunt gave a forced laugh. "Oh, Lena, don't be so dramatic. No one is kicking you out. This was just a suggestion." I turned my attention to her. "Then why the formal eviction notice?" Her smile faltered. She opened her mouth, then closed it, glancing at my father for support. He said nothing. I let the silence linger for just a moment longer before standing up. "Well, thanks for the thoughtful gift. Happy birthday to me." And with that, I walked out of my own living room, leaving them all to stew in the mess they had created. When I reached my bedroom, I locked the door and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. My hands were shaking. My heart was still hammering. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't shaking out of fear or frustration. It was something else entirely. Adrenaline, power, the realization that I had just shifted the dynamic in a way they weren't expecting. I wasn't going to let them take this house from me, and they had no idea what was coming next. I didn't leave my room for the rest of the night. Not because I was hiding, I just wanted them to sit with the tension they had created. I imagined them out there, whispering, scrambling to come up with a new plan now that I hadn't reacted the way they expected. I wasn't their naive, compliant caretaker anymore. At some point, I heard Kevin storm out, slamming the front door like a child throwing a tantrum. Alyssa's voice carried through the walls, full of exaggerated outrage. My aunt kept trying to smooth things over, her words dripping with fake sweetness. And my father? Silent. That told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't just mad. He was calculating. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen, acting like nothing had happened. My father was at the table, scrolling on his phone, his coffee steaming in front of him. Alyssa was picking at a piece of toast, looking like she hadn't slept. "Morning," I said, grabbing a cup for myself. My dad glanced at me but didn't respond. Alyssa snorted. "So, what's the plan, Lena?" she asked, her tone mocking. "Gonna barricade yourself in the house forever?" I took a sip of my coffee. "No need. It's already mine." She scowled, but before she could throw another insult, my father finally spoke. "We had a family meeting after you left last night." I raised an eyebrow. "Without me? How surprising." He ignored my sarcasm. "Your aunt's right. No one's kicking you out. We just want what's fair. We're family. This house should belong to all of us." I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "Funny, because none of you cared about the house when I was taking care of it alone. When I was the one making sure the bills were paid, keeping it in shape, dealing with the maintenance. But now that it's officially mine, suddenly it's a family home?" Alyssa rolled her eyes. "God, you make everything so dramatic." I smiled. "You mean like when you threw a full-on tantrum because Mom gave me her jewelry instead of you?" Her mouth snapped shut. My dad sighed heavily, like he was the real victim in all of this. "Look, let's be adults here. You don't need all this space. You could sell it, take the money, get an apartment." I cut him off. "I'm not selling the house." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "You're being unreasonable." "No," I said, setting my coffee down with deliberate care. "I've been reasonable my whole life. I took care of this house when no one else did. I helped you all financially without expecting anything in return. And in exchange, I got an eviction notice as my birthday gift." Alyssa huffed. "We already apologized for that." "No, you didn't." Silence. I let my gaze linger between them, making sure they knew that I saw right through their little performance. My father wasn't here to talk things out. He was here to wear me down. This wasn't an apology, it was an exhaustion tactic. He thought if he kept the conversation going, kept pushing and pushing, I'd eventually give in just to make it stop. He had no idea how much I had changed. "Well," I said, pushing off the counter, "I have things to do today, so if you'll excuse me." "We need to figure out the next steps," my father interrupted. I tilted my head. "Next steps for what?" He hesitated, then shifted tactics. "Look, your brother and sister are struggling. Kevin's between jobs, and Alyssa's still in school. You have the resources to help them. If you won't share the house, at least let them stay rent-free for a while." Alyssa perked up instantly. "Yeah, that's a good idea. Since you're all about fairness, Lena." I laughed out loud. "Wait, so first you try to evict me, and when that doesn't work, you decide I should just let you both live here for free?" I shook my head, letting out another chuckle. "You guys never fail to impress me." Alyssa flushed. My father's expression darkened. "This isn't a joke," he said, his voice sharper now. "We're talking about family." I gave him a long look. "You don't get to pull the family card now. Not after what you pulled yesterday." Alyssa scoffed, muttering something under her breath again. I turned my gaze on her. "You want a place to live? Get a job and pay rent somewhere like an adult. You're 19, not 9. Her face burned red. She shoved her plate aside and stormed out of the kitchen, slamming her door behind her. I turned back to my father. "Anything else?" His nostrils flared, and I could tell he was barely holding himself together. He took a slow sip of his coffee before setting it down with exaggerated care. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" I didn't answer. He stood, pushing his chair back with a scrape. "You'll regret this, Lena. One day you're going to need this family, and we won't be there." I met his gaze evenly. "I'll take my chances." Without another word, he walked out. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The moment he was gone, I grabbed my phone and made a call. It was time to make sure this house was legally untouchable. They had played their hand. Now it was my turn. The second the front door shut behind my father, I exhaled slowly. My heart was still pounding, but it wasn't from fear. It was something else, something sharper. Maybe adrenaline, maybe it was the sheer realization that I was done being manipulated. I grabbed my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the number I needed. It had been sitting in my phone for months, a backup plan I had never thought I'd have to use. But today? I was done waiting for things to get worse before I acted. The phone rang twice before a voice answered. "Hey, Lena. What's up?" It was my parents' old lawyer, the one who had handled their estate when they passed. I had never needed to call him before, but suddenly I felt beyond grateful that I had saved his number. "I need some legal advice," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Can we meet this week?" There was a pause. "Everything okay?" I hesitated, then said the simplest truth. "My family is trying to take my house from me." That got his full attention. "Yeah, let's meet. I have a feeling there's a lot to talk about." After we set a time, I ended the call, gripping my phone tightly. This was just the beginning. I spent the next few hours in my room making a list of everything I needed to do. There were loopholes my family could try to exploit, claims of undue influence, emotional coercion, or even trying to argue that the house should be considered a shared family asset instead of mine alone. I wasn't going to let them win on a technicality. I dug out every legal document I had, making sure I had multiple copies of everything. The title, the will, the official deed, all proof that I was the sole legal owner of this house. If they wanted a fight, I was going to be 10 steps ahead. By the time I emerged from my room, the house was eerily quiet. Kevin was still nowhere to be seen, and Alyssa had shut herself in her room. My father, thankfully, hadn't returned. But I knew the silence wasn't peace, it was just the calm before the next storm. I was right. The next morning, I woke up to pounding on my front door. Not knocking, pounding. I rolled out of bed, rubbing my eyes, already knowing exactly who it was. Sure enough, when I pulled the door open, Kevin stood there, hands on his hips, looking pissed. And behind him? My father. "Are you serious, Lena?" Kevin demanded before I even had the chance to say anything. "Dad told me everything. You're going to fight us over this house." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "I'm not fighting anyone. I'm just keeping what's legally mine." His jaw was clenched. "You're making this difficult for no reason. Do you even understand what you're doing? You're ruining our family." I let out a short laugh. "Oh, I'm ruining the family, right? Because it was a ruin the second you all tried to evict me from my own house." Kevin's eyes flashed with frustration, but my father stepped forward before he could respond. "We're not here to argue," he said, voice tight. "We're here to give you one last chance to do the right thing." I stared at him. "And what, exactly, is the right thing?" He inhaled deeply, as if he was gracing me with patience. "Sell the house. We'll split the money fairly, and you'll get your share. That way everyone benefits." I almost wanted to applaud them. It was impressive, really, how they kept shifting their tactics. First, they wanted me kicked out. Now, since that failed, they were acting like they were offering me a fair deal. I shook my head slowly. "No." Kevin let out a sharp breath. "You're so goddamn selfish." I raised an eyebrow. "Really? Because last I checked, I'm the only one who hasn't asked for a single thing from this family. But you know what? You're right. I am being selfish. And it's about time." My father's patience finally cracked. His voice dropped, sharp and full of warning. "If you refuse to work with us, don't expect us to be here when you need help." I smiled, stepping back toward the door. "That's the plan." And before either of them could say another word, I shut the door in their faces. I didn't wait to hear if they would knock again. I just locked it, walked back to my room, and exhaled. My hands were still trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer realization of what I had just done. I had shut them out. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't terrified of what would happen next. I sat in silence for a long time after shutting the door. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My heartbeat had settled. For once, I wasn't drowning in anxiety, trying to second-guess myself or search for the right way to handle things. There was no right way. There was only the truth, and I had finally stopped running from it. My family had never seen me as an equal. They had never respected me, not as a person, not as someone who had sacrificed for them, and certainly not as the rightful owner of this house. I was just an obstacle standing between them and what they believed was theirs. But they had underestimated me. The next morning, I met with the lawyer. He greeted me with a firm handshake, his expression unreadable as he flipped through the stack of legal documents I had brought. After a few minutes, he nodded. "You're in a strong position," he said, tapping the paperwork. "The house is entirely in your name. The will is clear. There's no legal standing for them to challenge your ownership." I exhaled slowly, some tension leaving my shoulders. "So, they can't force me out?" He shook his head. "No. But that doesn't mean they won't try to make your life miserable in other ways." That was the part one had been dreading. I had already seen the lengths they were willing to go to just to push me into submission. The eviction notice, the guilt trips, the sudden shift to demanding I sell. This wasn't over. What do I do next? I asked. His eyes flickered with something that almost looked like amusement. Well, if I were you, I'd stop playing defense and go on the offensive. The words sent a thrill through me. I had spent my entire life reacting to their demands, their manipulations, their constant expectations that I would fall in line. But why should I wait for their next move? It was my house. It was time I started acting like it. That night, I changed the locks. I had been meaning to for a while, but now it wasn't just an idea, it was a necessity. I also installed security cameras, something I should have done months ago. And just in time. Because 2 days later, I came home to find my brother trying to break in. I pulled into the driveway and saw his car parked at the curb. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to stay calm. I stepped out, keys in hand, watching as Kevin fiddled with the front door handle. He hadn't noticed me yet. Cleared my throat. Lose something? He jerked back like I had electrocuted him. His face twisted in irritation before he quickly covered it with an easy smirk. Oh, hey, Lena. Didn't hear you pull up. I gestured at the door. What are you doing? His eyes flicked to the side, a telltale sign that he was scrambling for an excuse. I left some stuff inside last time I was here. Just grabbing it. I leaned against the car, crossing my arms. You didn't text me. Didn't call. And last time I checked, you don't live here. His expression hardened. Lena, come on. Don't be ridiculous. It's just a few things. Funny. Because the cameras say otherwise. His face paled. Cameras? Yeah. You're on tape, genius. His jaw was clenched, and for a moment, I saw something flash in his eyes. Frustration. Desperation. A deep-seated rage that I had never quite realized was there before. You're really doing this, he muttered. Turning against your own family. I didn't even blink. No. I'm protecting myself from people who clearly don't respect boundaries. He exhaled sharply, stepping back. Fine. Have it your way. As he walked to his car, I didn't look away. I needed him to know that I wasn't afraid. That whatever power he and the rest of them thought they had over me, it was gone. That night, I filed a trespassing report. My father called the next day, voice dripping with artificial concern. Lena, honey, Kevin told me what happened. Did you call the cops on your brother? He tried to break into my house. I said, voice steady. So yes, I did. A beat of silence. Then the sigh. I don't understand what's happening to you. I closed my eyes briefly, letting his words roll off me. What's happening to me? I had finally stopped letting them walk all over me. I had finally drawn a line and held it. I opened my eyes. I understand perfectly. And I hung up. I knew this wasn't the end. But for the first time in my life, I was ready for whatever came next. After I hung up, I sat there for a moment, staring at my phone. The old me would have felt a pang of guilt, maybe even reconsidered everything. But the person I was becoming, she felt nothing but relief. The more I distanced myself from them, the clearer things became. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a family disagreement that could be talked out over dinner. This was greed. Pure, unfiltered greed disguised as family loyalty. I went about my day as if nothing had happened, refusing to let them ruin another second of my time. Work was normal. My coworkers oblivious to the chaos happening behind the scenes of my personal life. It was weird, realizing how much of my life I had spent covering for my family's behavior, how many times I had painted them as just a little dysfunctional instead of actively toxic. That illusion was gone now. I was still processing everything later that night when I heard a knock at my door. Not the aggressive pounding from before. This was quieter, hesitant. I checked the peephole. Alyssa. I exhaled slowly before opening the door. She stood there, arms crossed, looking less smug than usual. Her makeup was smeared, eyes puffy like she had been crying. I braced myself for manipulation attempt number 50, but something about her expression gave me pause. What do you want? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She hesitated, then exhaled. Can I come in? For a second, I considered saying no, slamming the door in her face the way they had metaphorically slammed me out of my own family. But something in me, the part of me that still remembered when we were just kids, before all the resentment, sighed in resignation. I stepped aside. 5 minutes. She walked in, looking around like she expected something to have changed since she had last been here. Maybe she thought I'd be miserable, drowning in loneliness now that they had cut me off. The joke's on her. I had never felt lighter. She perched on the couch, tapping her fingers against her knee, clearly trying to figure out how to start. I waited, arms crossed. Finally, she blurted out, "Dad and Kevin are idiots." I blinked. "Okay." She chewed on her lip. "I don't agree with what they did. The eviction thing. I thought it was stupid." I raised an eyebrow. "You thought it was stupid, but you still sat there, smirking while I opened the notice?" Her expression twisted into something like shame. "I don't know, okay? I thought it was funny at first, but I didn't think they'd actually go through with it. I didn't think you'd fight back like this." There it was. The real reason she was here. She wasn't apologizing because she felt bad. She was scared. Scared because, for the first time, I had changed the rules of the game. I leaned against the wall, watching her. "So, why are you really here, Alyssa?" She hesitated. "Kevin's losing it. He thinks you're going to press charges." I tilted my head. "Maybe I will." Her eyes widened. "You wouldn't." "Why wouldn't I?" I cut her off. "He tried to break into my house. If it were a stranger, you'd all tell me to call the police. But because it's Kevin, I'm just supposed to let it go." She swallowed hard. I don't want things to get worse." I sighed. "Alyssa, things have been bad for a long time. You just didn't care until it started affecting you." She flinched, looking away. For a second, I thought maybe she was going to say something real, something honest. But instead, she shook her head and stood up. "Forget it," she muttered. "I shouldn't have come." I didn't stop her. She walked to the door, then hesitated. When she turned back, her expression was softer, almost uncertain. "You don't miss us?" I met her gaze. "I missed the idea of what we should have been. That was the truth." She swallowed, nodded once, and then she was gone. I locked the door behind her and stood there for a long time, staring at the space where she had been. Maybe there had been a small part of me deep down that had wanted at least one of them to understand. But Alyssa wasn't ready. Maybe she never would be. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. There was no pit in my stomach, no underlying anxiety about what new scheme my family might pull. I had already seen their worst and I had survived it. More than that, I had won. I wasn't naive. I knew Kevin, my father, and probably my aunt were still plotting. But they had lost the element of surprise, and without that, they had nothing. I had made it clear that I wasn't playing their game anymore. For the first time in my life, I wasn't scared of what would happen next. But they were. It only took 3 days before my father called again. I debated ignoring it, but I was too curious. This wasn't going to be another guilt trip. No, this was desperation. I answered, keeping my voice flat. "What?" There was a beat of silence, like he hadn't expected me to pick up. Then, "Lena, let's be reasonable here." I almost laughed. Now, he wanted to be reasonable? He sighed when I didn't respond. "Look, your brother made a mistake. But we can't have this turn into a legal issue. We're family. We should protect each other." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "You mean I should protect Kevin? Even though he tried to break into my house?" My father exhaled sharply. "It wasn't like that." I smirked. "Oh? Then tell me, what was it like? Because from where I'm sitting, it looked a lot like breaking." He was silent for a second, then dropped the nice guy act. "If you go through with this, you'll regret it." And there it was. The real him. I smiled. "Thanks for the threat. That'll sound great in court." "Lena." I hung up. Then I blocked his number. I was done. Later that evening, I went through my phone, blocking all of them. My aunt, my uncle, even Alyssa. Not because she had wronged me the way the others had, but because I was done waiting for her to choose me over them. She had made her choice. So I made mine. And that was it. Days passed. Then weeks. The calls stopped. The messages disappeared. It was quiet. Peaceful. I focused on myself for the first time in years. I picked up hobbies I had abandoned. I spent time with friends I had neglected. I started building a life that was truly my own. I had spent so long thinking I needed them. That being alone was the worst thing that could happen to me. But I wasn't alone. I was finally truly free. And it all started with a birthday gift I'll never forget. Hope you enjoyed this story as much as I do. Help this small channel grow by hitting that like button, subscribing, and sharing with your friends. Every bit of support means the world. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.